Good afternoon. Due to some technical difficulties that we're having, we are going to be using the document camera instead of the smart board for a little while I do my recordings. Today we are starting off with PO54. I can graph an equation in slope-intercept form. So because it's a PO and it's something that we really need to have mastered, we will be spending 2 days on this objective because it's very important that we understand it. So it's building off of objectives that we've done in the past. So let's look at what the slope-intercept form is. The slope-intercept form is a way to write a linear equation that makes it easily graphable based on what the equation tells you about how the line moves across the coordinate plane. So we're going to be using the slope, we're going to be using the y-intercept, and we're going to see how we can easily graph a line based on this equation. So the first thing we need to know is the slope-intercept form. So that is y equals mx plus b. So we need that equation. That is very important to remember. You will use this equation in many years to come in math class. So you will work with this equation a lot. So you need to know the slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And remember, when we have two variables next to each other, it means we are multiplying them. So now we need to know what the x stands for. The x stands for the x value of any ordered pair on the line. So if the x is the x value of any ordered pair on the line, the y is the y value of any ordered pair on the line. So we know what our x and our y stand for. The m is the slope of the line, and the b is the y-intercept of the line. So we've got our x and our y, the m is the slope, the b is the y-intercept. So then once we have that information, we can go ahead and graph the equation in the slope-intercept form, and we have 3 steps we're going to follow. Our first step is we're going to plot the y-intercept. It's where you begin. That's why it's the B, because we're beginning with the y-intercept. That we know how to graph easily. We begin our line with that. So it's the B. Number 2 is we're going to use the slope to get a second point. So we can use that y-intercept to get our first point, then we use the slope to get our second point, and that is how you move. That's why it's the M, because the slope tells us how we are moving on that graph, on that coordinate plane. So it tells us our rise over run from point to point. And our third step is the easiest one. We just connect the points with a line. Make sure when you're connecting points with a line that you put the arrows on the end to show that it's a line and not a segment. So in a negative slope, only one of the parts, the numerator or the denominator, is negative. Typically, the sign is put with the numerator so that we stay consistent in having a positive denominator and moving to the right. So here's where the x and the y come in. If graphed correctly, any point on the line will work in the equation. Plug one in and check. So let's see how that will work. Let's figure out how we use that slope-intercept form. We're going to do a few together. Identify the slope and the y-intercept, then graph each equation. So here's our equation, y equals 2x minus 3. So to find our y-intercept, remember that y-intercept is b. So here b, we see that there's a 3, but remember that it's a negative 3. Minus 3 means negative 3. So we're not going to put just negative 3 like that. Our y-intercept is going to be our ordered pair. We know that the y-intercept has the x as a 0. We can't graph just negative 3. We have to graph it with x being a 0. So we need to make sure that we write it as an ordered pair. X is 0, the y-intercept is negative 3, so that we need to put our ordered pair there. Then for our slope, the slope is the m. I'm going to write it over here so we can see it. Our equation is y equals mx plus b. So our m is the slope. It's what we're multiplying the x by. So here we're multiplying the x by the 2. So our slope, we don't just say 2 because remember our slope is rise over run. So we want to put our run on there. So when we have a whole number listed as our slope, we know that it's a fraction. So what goes under the whole number is a 1 when we turn our whole number into a fraction. So here we have our y-intercept. Our first step is to plot that y-intercept where we begin. So we're at 0, negative 3. And then our second step is to use the slope to find our second point. So we are at, our slope is the rise, is a positive 2, so we're going to go up. And our run is 1, so we're going to go over 1. We're going to draw our line, putting our arrows on. And now it says we can check it by plugging in any ordered pair to see if it's graphed correctly. So I could put in, let's see, if I had drawn my line straight, I would have hit right up here with my x being 2 and my y being 1. So I could put in my x to be 2 and my y to be 1. So let's see if that would work. If I put my 2, because right here, my ordered pair is x is 2, y is 1. So if I put a 2 in, that would be 2 times 2 is 4, minus 3 equals 1. So it works. So that's how I can check my equation, make sure that I graphed it correctly. Let's look at my next one. My y-intercept, remember the y-intercept is b, where I begin. So my y-intercept, I want to write as an ordered pair. I have that 1 for the y, and I know a 0 for the x. My slope is how it moves. That's the m, and it's negative 3/4. So I'm going to start with my x at 0, my y is at 1. And I'm going to move negative 3. Remember, negative means we're going down. So I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4. And then my third step is to connect them. Drawing my arrows to show that it's a line and not a segment. And you can check it by finding an ordered pair and seeing if it falls on there. Let's look at our last one. Y equals x plus 3. So my y-intercept, remember that's B where I begin. So my y-intercept, x is 0, the y is 3. Now my slope is what's before the x. And we know that when we multiply a variable by 1, it's going to be that number. So if we put a 5 in for the x and we multiplied it by 1, it would still be 5. So when we're multiplying by a 1, we don't write that 1 in there, but we know we're multiplying by 1. So our slope would be 1 over 1. So now I'm going to graph it. I'm going to graph 0, 3 with a slope of going up 1 over 1. And then I'm going to draw my line, and hopefully I can draw it straight. Did not draw this one very straight. Should go like that. And I'm going to draw my arrows to show it's a line and not a segment. So when we look at our work today, we're just going to work on this first page. So we're going to work on our first page. One thing that I want us to pay attention to is that if there is no B listed, we know that our B is actually a 0, because adding 0 doesn't change it at all, so we don't actually write plus 0, but we know it means plus 0. So we have our y-intercept with the 0. So if our y-intercept, if the y, let me see. So y-intercept, we know we have to write it as an ordered pair. The x is always a 0 for a y-intercept. And if we write a 0 in because there's no b listed, we know it's going to be a 0. And if we come down here, well, let's finish this one off. Y-intercept is 0, 0, because we had to add that 0 there. Then we also need to write our slope. So our slope here, when we have a whole number, we want to turn it into a fraction. So to turn a whole number into a fraction, you put the 1 under it. So we know our rise over run. For each of our problems on this back, I want to see you writing out the y-intercept and the slope. So write those out so we make sure that we are graphing our lines correctly. When we come down to this one, we see y equals x. Remember, for that multiplying our x, if there's nothing there, it means there's a 1. And if there is no b listed, it means plus 0. So again, you're going to write out your y-intercept as an ordered pair. You're going to write your slope, and then you're going to go through the 3 steps to graph it. And that is how we use the y-intercept form. The last page of CO54 we will do on Thursday when we have math class. So we do not have to do the entire PO54 in one day. We are splitting it into 2. So I hope you are well, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good day.